Every human being enters the world already surrounded by beliefs they did not choose. From the first breath, a structure is waiting. A religion, a worldview, a moral code, a narrative about what is true and what is forbidden. It does not ask for consent. It does not wait for maturity. It presents itself as reality itself. This is not an accident. It is how societies survive. Belief systems are inherited long before they are examined, absorbed long before they are understood. And in this silent transmission lies the first violence done to the human mind. True freedom, if it exists at all, should begin only when a person becomes capable of questioning, when belief is no longer a reflex but a conscious act, when one can decide whether to believe, what to believe, who to trust, or whether to reject imposed beliefs entirely. But this moment rarely comes. Most people never reach it. They confuse inheritance with truth, repetition with evidence, comfort with meaning. And so belief, as it is commonly practiced, becomes not a private matter but a collective danger. This was the unsettling conviction of William Kingdom Clifford, an English philosopher and mathematician who, in the heart of the 19th century, articulated a principle so uncompromising that it still unsettles public debate today. Clifford did not treat belief as a harmless personal choice. He treated it as a moral act with consequences that extend far beyond the individual. For him, no belief exists in isolation. Every conviction shapes behavior, influences others, and silently molds the world we share. Born in Exeter in 1845, Clifford showed extraordinary intellectual ability from an early age, moving effortlessly between pure mathematics and deep philosophical inquiry. His life was short, only 33 years, cut off by tuberculosis in 1879, but his impact was enduring. He anticipated a problem that would only grow more severe with time, a world where beliefs spread faster than evidence, where conviction replaces understanding, and where certainty is prized more than truth. Clifford understood something most people prefer not to face. Believing is not passive. It is not innocent. It is an action. And like all actions, it carries responsibility. In his most famous work, The Ethics of Belief, Clifford refused abstraction. He went directly to the core of the problem. Every time a person chooses to believe something without sufficient evidence, a moral failure occurs, not only against oneself but against society as a whole. The content of the belief is irrelevant. What matters is the way it is formed. To expose this idea, Clifford offered a simple story. A ship owner knows his vessel is flawed. It needs repairs. There are warning signs. Evidence is clear. Yet, instead of confronting reality, he convinces himself that everything will be fine. He trusts in hope, in providence, in reassurance without justification. The ship sets sail, full of passengers. It sinks. Lives are lost, but Clifford's judgment is more disturbing than it first appears. The owner's guilt does not lie in the shipwreck. He would have been just as guilty if the ship had arrived safely. The moral failure occurred the moment he chose belief over evidence. The crime was not the outcome, but the refusal to seek truth. This is the heart of Clifford's philosophy. Believing without evidence is not merely an intellectual mistake. It is an ethical one. It trains the mind to accept claims without scrutiny. It weakens society's immune system against deception. It creates a culture where authority replaces truth and doubt is treated as betrayal. Clifford was not attacking religion as such. He was attacking blind faith itself. Comfort does not justify belief. Tradition does not justify belief. Psychological relief does not justify belief. If there is no evidence, belief becomes an act of negligence toward the shared world. It is wrong always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything upon insufficient evidence. Clifford did not soften this claim. He did not qualify it. He understood its severity, and he accepted it. For him, even beliefs that happen to produce good outcomes remain morally wrong if they were formed irresponsibly. Consequences do not redeem negligence. Truth demands effort, and refusing that effort is a betrayal of one's duty. To others, Clifford's position becomes even more radical when placed in the context of society. No belief remains private for long. Beliefs shape cultures, laws, institutions, and norms. They determine who is obeyed, who is silenced, and who is sacrificed. A society built on unexamined beliefs is not merely ignorant, it is vulnerable. Vulnerable to manipulation, exploitation, and control. Faith without evidence feeds systems where questioning is dangerous and obedience is rewarded, where tradition is used as a shield against accountability, where freedom of thought exists only as an illusion. Clifford saw critical thinking not as arrogance but as respect for oneself and for others. To question is not to destroy meaning. It is to refuse false meaning. In a world flooded with information, opinions, and ready-made truths, Clifford's warning feels more urgent than ever. Passive belief has become effortless. Mental laziness is encouraged. Certainty is marketed. Doubt is discouraged. And yet the moral duty remains unchanged. To pause, to question, to demand evidence. This is not a call to reject all belief. It is a call to take responsibility for belief, to build convictions on solid ground rather than inherited comfort. Every belief accepted without scrutiny contributes to a less free world. Every refusal to question strengthens the structures that profit from ignorance. Clifford did not offer comfort. He offered responsibility. He understood that truth is not merely an intellectual value, but a matter of justice. What we believe shapes the world others must live in. The question remains open and deeply unsettling. Are we willing to sacrifice comforting certainties in the name of intellectual honesty? And what would happen to a society that finally refuses to accept as truth what has been taken for granted for centuries? Listening to stillness does not mean indulging every impulse to withdraw, nor does it mean abandoning responsibility. Jung never advocated escapism. What he emphasized was discernment. There is a profound difference between unconscious avoidance and conscious withdrawal. Avoidance numbs. It distracts. It fills silence with noise so nothing essential can be felt. Conscious withdrawal, by contrast, is attentive. It notices the quality of the heaviness, the emotional texture of the fatigue, the images that arise when one stops running. This kind of stillness is active, even though it appears passive from the outside. Jung believed that when the psyche enters a phase of incubation, it often communicates first through resistance. You try to push forward, but something inside refuses. You attempt to motivate yourself, but the language of motivation no longer works. This is not because you have lost discipline. It is because the psyche no longer responds to force. Force belongs to earlier stages of development, when identity was built through adaptation and effort. At deeper stages, growth happens through surrender and listening. The ego resists this truth because its sense of control depends on motion. To stop feels like death to the ego. It fears that without constant activity it will dissolve. In a sense, it is right. Something does dissolve. But what dissolves is not the core self. It is the outdated structure that can no longer support who you are becoming. Jung described this as the necessary death of old forms. No transformation occurs without disintegration. The psyche must be allowed to fall apart in order to reassemble itself more truthfully. This is why guilt so often accompanies stillness. Guilt is the ego's defense mechanism. It tries to shame you back into motion because it equates movement with survival. But guilt is a poor guide for psychological truth. It reflects social conditioning more than inner reality. Jung warned that when people live too long according to borrowed values, their psyche eventually rebels. Fatigue becomes the weapon of that rebellion. Not to destroy you, but to stop you. Stopping is terrifying in a culture that equates worth with output. When you are no longer producing, no longer striving, no longer improving, you begin to question your value. Jung saw this as a collective neurosis. Modern humanity, he believed, had lost contact with the soul because it feared silence. Silence removes distractions, and without distractions, truth emerges. Truth often demands change. Stillness, then, is not comfortable. It is confrontational in its own quiet way, yet within this confrontation lies renewal. Jung observed that when individuals honored these periods of withdrawal instead of resisting them, something remarkable occurred. Dreams intensified. Symbols appeared spontaneously. Old memories surfaced not as burdens but as material for integration. The psyche began to tell its story not through exhaustion but through imagery. This is the sign that incubation is working. The unconscious is no longer forced to shout through fatigue. It can speak through vision. This is also where creativity quietly returns, not as productivity, but as curiosity. A thought arises without effort. An image lingers. A question feels alive rather than urgent. These are subtle signals that the psyche is reorganizing successfully. Energy does not come back all at once. It seeps in slowly, like light at dawn. Jung cautioned against rushing this phase. To force movement too early is to interrupt the process. Like opening an oven before the bread has set, you collapse what was forming. One of Jung's most radical insights was that transformation cannot be commanded. It can only be allowed. The ego's task during incubation is not to act, but to tolerate uncertainty. This tolerance is rare. It requires trust in something unseen. It demands humility, the willingness to admit that conscious will is not the highest authority in the psyche. For many, this is the hardest lesson. We want to fix, optimize, accelerate. The soul asks us to wait. Waiting, however, does not mean doing nothing internally. It means paying attention. Jung encouraged people to notice what emotions arise in stillness. Boredom, anxiety, sadness, irritation. These are not obstacles. They are gateways. Each emotion carries information about what has been ignored. When boredom appears, it may signal a life starved of meaning. When anxiety surfaces, it may reveal fear of change. When sadness arrives, it may point to grief long postponed. Stillness gives these emotions permission to speak. Over time, something shifts. The heaviness changes quality. It no longer feels like a dead weight. It feels like a cocoon. You sense that something is forming, though you cannot yet name it. Jung described this as the psyche turning toward the self, the archetype of wholeness that guides individuation. The self does not shout. It whispers. It uses fatigue, silence, and withdrawal to redirect attention inward, away from external roles and toward inner truth. This is why stillness often precedes major life changes. Careers end not in dramatic failure, but in quiet exhaustion. Relationships dissolve not always through conflict, but through indifference. Identities fade not because they were wrong, but because they are finished. The psyche knows when a chapter has ended long before the mind accepts it. Fatigue is often the first announcement, if you listen carefully. Stillness begins to feel less like an enemy and more like a threshold. You are standing between what has been and what has not yet taken shape. There is grief here, yes. But there is also possibility. Jung believed that the greatest danger was not collapse, but premature certainty. To rush into a new identity, a new goal, a new narrative before the psyche has completed its work is to repeat the same misalignment in a different form. The wisdom of stillness lies in its patience. It refuses to be hurried. It teaches you to endure not knowing, to sit with the question rather than demand the answer. This is the discipline Jung valued most, the discipline of inner listening. It is quieter than ambition, slower than strategy, but infinitely more precise. When you allow this process to unfold, something remarkable happens. One day, without effort, you feel a slight return of vitality. Not the frantic energy of obligation, but a clean, grounded readiness. You are not driven. You are drawn. Action arises naturally, not from fear, but from alignment. This is how the psyche signals that incubation is ending. Stillness, then, is not the opposite of movement. It is its preparation. It is the dark soil from which authentic action grows. Jung understood that only actions born from this depth have lasting meaning. Everything else eventually exhausts itself, and so when you wake and feel that nameless heaviness, consider the possibility that your soul is not failing you. It is guiding you. It is asking for the courage to stop, to listen, to trust a process that cannot be measured or rushed. This is not laziness. It is loyalty to something deeper than expectation. If Chapter 1 describes the moment when the psyche withdraws its energy, Chapter 2 enters the terrain where that withdrawal deepens into transformation. This is the descent, the phase Jung considered unavoidable for any genuine change. The ego experiences it as loss of direction, loss of motivation, loss of identity. The soul experiences it as necessary decomposition. Jung often compared psychological transformation to alchemy. In ancient alchemical texts, the first stage of transformation was nigredo, the blackening. Matter had to decay, rot, and dissolve before it could be transmuted. Without nigredo, there was no gold. Likewise, the psyche must pass through a dark, inert phase before renewal. Rest, in this context, is not recovery from effort. It is participation in dissolution. During this phase, you may feel cut off from meaning. Goals that once structured your life lose their emotional charge. You may question decisions that once felt obvious. This is not regression. It is disidentification. Jung believed that the psyche must withdraw projection before it can reorganize itself. What once felt meaningful often carried unconscious expectations, borrowed values, or unresolved needs. When those projections collapse, emptiness appears. That emptiness is honest. The ego hates this honesty. It wants replacement meaning immediately. It wants reassurance. It wants to know what comes next. But the psyche does not answer on demand. It insists on rest first, on silence, on allowing the old structures to fully disintegrate. This is why forcing positivity during this phase often backfires. Affirmations feel hollow. Motivation feels artificial. The soul rejects what is premature. Rest during this phase is not simply physical. It is psychological rest from self-definition, from striving to explain who you are and where you are going. Jung believed that identity must sometimes go into suspension. The persona, the social mask, loosens. You may feel strangely anonymous, even to yourself. This anonymity is fertile. It creates space for something more authentic to emerge. As rest deepens, dreams often become more vivid. Jung saw dreams as the psyche's preferred language during transformation. When waking life slows, the unconscious steps forward. Dreams present symbols of death, descent, water, caves, wombs, forests. These are not random. They are archetypal images of incubation. The psyche is showing you where you are. The descent can feel lonely because it is largely invisible to others. From the outside, nothing appears to be happening. Internally, everything is rearranging. This is why Jung warned against comparing your inner timeline to external standards. The psyche has its own rhythm. To violate it is to risk neurosis. Rest, in this sense, becomes an ethical act. You are choosing fidelity to your inner truth over conformity to external pressure. Jung believed this choice was the foundation of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. Without rest, individuation collapses into performance. As this phase continues, something subtle begins to stabilize. The fear of stillness lessens. Silence becomes tolerable, even nourishing. You begin to trust that you are not disappearing. You are condensing. The soul is gathering itself, and this is where alchemy turns. Nigredo does not last forever. But it cannot be skipped. As the descent deepens, rest takes on a different quality. It is no longer merely the absence of action, but a deliberate slowing of inner narration. The constant inner commentary that once evaluated progress, judged worth, and measured direction begins to fade. This can feel frightening because that commentary once provided a sense of control. Without it, the psyche feels exposed. Jung understood this exposure as essential. The ego must relinquish its constant supervision for the deeper psyche to speak freely. During this phase, people often report a sense of being suspended outside of time. Days blur, the urgency that once structured life dissolves. You may notice that past and future lose their grip, leaving you oddly anchored in the present moment, not through effort, but through inertia. This temporal flattening is not dissociation. It is the psyche stepping out of linear progression to reorganize itself holistically. Jung believed that transformation requires stepping outside chronological time and entering psychological time. where processes unfold according to meaning rather than schedule. This is why attempts to get back on track during this phase often fail. The track itself no longer exists. It belonged to a previous identity. To force yourself back into it is to deny the reality of change already underway. Jung warned that such resistance often manifests as anxiety, irritability, or psychosomatic symptoms. The psyche will find a way to stop you if you refuse to stop voluntarily. Rest here becomes an act of listening rather than recovery. You begin to notice subtle shifts in perception. Old desires lose their emotional charge. Certain ambitions feel strangely irrelevant. This is not because you have become indifferent to life, but because your value system is reorganizing. Jung described this as a withdrawal of projections. What once seemed desirable often carried unconscious fantasies about fulfillment, approval, or safety. When those projections dissolve, desire quiets. What remains is a blank space that feels unsettling but honest. In this space, the psyche often revisits unresolved material. Memories surface without warning. Childhood scenes, forgotten conversations, half-remembered dreams. Jung believed these were not random intrusions but attempts at integration. The psyche brings forward what must be acknowledged before it can move on. Rest allows this material to appear without being immediately suppressed or rationalized. It is crucial to understand that this phase does not respond to forceful introspection. Jung cautioned against dissecting every feeling or memory with analysis. The unconscious does not respond well to interrogation. It responds to attention, gentle, non-demanding awareness. When you allow memories and emotions to arise without trying to fix or explain them, they begin to reorganize themselves naturally. Integration happens not through effort, but through presence. As the psyche works, you may experience emotional flatness. This is often misinterpreted as depression. While depression can coexist with transformation, Jung distinguished between pathological withdrawal and meaningful retreat. In meaningful retreat, there is a quiet sense of rightness beneath the discomfort. The stillness feels heavy but not hopeless. There is pain but not despair. This distinction is subtle but important. The soul knows when it is withdrawing to heal rather than collapsing. One of the most misunderstood aspects of this phase is its impact on relationships. As inner energy withdraws, social engagement often decreases. You may feel less inclined to explain yourself, to maintain appearances, or to participate in conversations that once felt natural. Jung saw this as a temporary introversion of libido. Energy turns inward to support transformation. This is not rejection of others. It is conservation of psychic resources. Modern culture often pathologizes this withdrawal, labeling it as antisocial or unproductive. Jung argued that such judgments reflect collective fear of introspection. Societies built on constant output have little patience for inner work. Yet history shows that the most profound contributions often emerge from periods of solitude and rest. The psyche needs privacy to reinvent itself. As rest continues, a strange paradox appears. The more you stop trying to become something, the more authentic impulses begin to surface. They arrive quietly. A curiosity you haven't felt in years. A subtle interest that feels oddly alive. Jung described these moments as signals from the self. They are not commands. They are invitations. They do not demand immediate action. They simply appear, asking to be noticed. This is where many people make a crucial mistake. They rush to act on these impulses prematurely, eager to escape the discomfort of stillness. Jung warned that this often leads to repetition rather than renewal. The impulse must be allowed to mature. Like a seed underground, it needs time before it can support visible growth. Rest protects this maturation. Gradually, the heaviness that once felt oppressive begins to change texture. It becomes less like a weight and more like density. You feel grounded rather than stuck. Silence becomes less threatening. The need to distract yourself diminishes. Jung believed this shift signaled that the psyche had completed the most fragile part of its work. The new configuration was beginning to stabilize. At this point, rest transforms again. It is no longer withdrawal. It becomes readiness. You are not yet moving, but you are no longer resisting movement. The difference is subtle but profound. The body feels calmer. Breathing deepens. Sleep becomes restorative rather than escapist. Dreams begin to shift in tone, moving from chaos to coherence. This is the alchemical turning point. Nigredo begins to give way to albedo, the whitening, the stage of clarification. The psyche has survived disintegration. It has not collapsed. This realization builds trust. You begin to understand, not intellectually but experientially, that stillness does not annihilate you. It reforms you. Rest, then, reveals its true nature. It is not the absence of life. It is the womb of life. Jung believed that only those who can tolerate this womb-like phase can emerge with a sense of purpose that is not borrowed or imposed. Purpose that arises from this depth feels quieter but stronger. It does not shout. It does not need constant validation. It simply directs. As this understanding settles, a new relationship to action begins to form. Action is no longer a defense against anxiety. It becomes an expression of alignment. You do not force yourself to move. Movement arises. This is how the psyche signals that descent is nearing completion. But before ascent begins, there is one more lesson rest teaches. It teaches humility. It reminds the ego that it is not the sole author of life, that something larger, deeper, and wiser moves through you when you allow it space. Jung believed this recognition was essential for wholeness. Without it, growth becomes arrogance. With it, growth becomes integration. The soul's descent, then, is not a detour. It is the path itself. Rest is not a pause between meaningful moments. It is one of the most meaningful moments the psyche can experience. To honor it is to honor the intelligence of life within you, and when the time is right, rest will release you. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but with a quiet sense of inevitability. You will feel it before you understand it. A gentle pull toward engagement, a readiness that does not argue. This is how the psyche announces that the alchemy has worked. Rebirth, as Jung understood it, rarely arrives with fireworks. It does not announce itself as a sudden transformation or a dramatic breakthrough. More often, it emerges quietly, almost imperceptibly, as a subtle shift in how energy moves through the psyche. After prolonged stillness, after the descent and rest have completed their work, something begins to flow again. Not because you decided it should, but because the inner conditions now allow it. The first sign of this return is not motivation. It is interest. You find yourself drawn to something without effort. A thought lingers. An image feels alive. A question arises not from anxiety but from curiosity. Jung saw this as the most reliable indicator of authentic direction. True energy does not arrive with pressure. It arrives with attraction. This distinction is critical. The old ego-driven energy was fueled by obligation, fear, and external expectation. It demanded constant reinforcement. It collapsed when pressure was removed. The energy that returns after incubation is different. It is quieter, steadier, and more selective. It does not rush. It does not justify itself. It simply moves toward what aligns. As this energy returns, identity begins to reform, but not as a rigid structure. It forms organically around values that have been clarified through stillness. You no longer need to convince yourself of who you are. Actions feel self-evident. Choices feel less dramatic. Jung described this as living in accordance with the self rather than the persona. Life becomes less about proving and more about expressing. Importantly, this rebirth does not erase the memory of stillness. You do not forget what it taught you. Instead, it changes your relationship to effort. You recognize earlier signs of misalignment. You respect fatigue rather than fighting it. You trust withdrawal as a signal rather than a failure. This is one of the lasting gifts of descent. It rewires how you listen to yourself. As movement resumes, it does so in cycles. Periods of engagement alternate naturally with periods of rest. Jung believed that psychological health was not constant balance but dynamic rhythm. The soul expands and contracts. It moves outward and inward. When this rhythm is honored, energy remains sustainable. Burnout becomes less likely because rest is no longer resisted until collapse. This is where the final misunderstanding dissolves. Laziness was never the issue. The issue was authenticity. When life is aligned, effort feels meaningful. When it is not, the psyche intervenes. Rest was not asking you to abandon life. It was asking you to return to it differently. In this way, rebirth is not becoming someone new. It is shedding what was never truly you. Jung emphasized that individuation is not about self-improvement. It is about self-recovery, recovering the parts of the psyche that were buried under expectation, adaptation, and fear. When you move from this place, your actions carry a different weight. They are not frantic. They are deliberate. You may do less, but what you do matters more. Energy is no longer scattered. It is focused. This focus is not rigid. It is responsive. You adapt without losing yourself. There will still be moments of fatigue. Stillness will still return, but it will no longer terrify you. You will recognize it as a familiar messenger rather than an enemy. Each return of stillness will be shorter, less dramatic, because you will listen sooner. This is psychological maturity. Jung believed that the ultimate goal of the psyche was not happiness, but wholeness. Wholeness includes rest and action, silence and expression, descent and ascent. When these are allowed to coexist, life gains depth. Meaning is no longer manufactured. It emerges naturally from alignment. So when you wake again one morning and feel the urge to stay still, remember what you have learned. Ask not what is wrong, but what is being asked of you. Trust that the soul does not withdraw without reason. Trust that stillness is not the end of movement, but its beginning. Rebirth does not demand force. It arrives when resistance ends. And when it arrives, you will not need to push yourself forward. Life will move through you with the quiet confidence of something that knows where it is going.